Okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is the second Enrich Learning Parent Webinar of the year. My name is Onyinye Udokporo, and I am founder and CEO of Enrich Learning. I'm also dyslexic, so I'm going to set a timer to make sure that I do leave time for questions. If I don't do this, we'll go over time. So today's session is all about how to transition to secondary school, and we're going to be looking at state school, grammar school, and private school. So I am going to talk about the 11 plus. There are always so many questions about the 11 plus, but I'm also going to be talking about the 13 plus and something that we also call the 16 plus, which many parents are not aware of. It has to be said that each individual aspect, 13 plus, 11 plus, 16 plus, I could do entire webinars just on those topics. And that will happen in due course, but please take today's session as more of an overview. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Onyinye Udokporo. I have many jobs which I love. But first and foremost, I am a leading education expert. I have a postgraduate degree in education policy and society from King's College London, where I was the first ever student of the year and top 10 Black student in the UK. My postgraduate research was used to inform the UK Prime Minister's Office of what education for children really looked like on the ground during the COVID-19 pandemic. And having been inspired by all of you, I've decided to put my research hat back on, and I'll be doing a lot more research in education and hopefully having those papers published and delivered in ways that are useful to you. And I'll be continuing to do free sessions like this every month. So you're in for a real treat. I'm also a neurodiversity consultant. So I teach brands and organizations and schools and universities how to create safe spaces for their neurodivergent employees, students, staff members, colleagues. I also work with a team of experienced special educational needs assessors and SENDCOs to provide special educational needs support for parents. And there will be a lot more stuff around neurodiversity next month, because next month we do have Neurodiversity Celebration Week. And then last but never least, I am the published author of the book Dyslexia and Me, How to Survive and Thrive If You're Neurodivergent. You can buy this book in any good bookstore. It's supplied it's on Amazon, it's on Waterstones, WH Smith. Anywhere you can buy a book, you can buy my book. And it's also available on audiobook from Spotify to Audible to downloading it on Google Play to Apple Music. Wherever you like to listen to your books, you can read more about my story and my journey with dyslexia, because I am indeed dyslexic. So let's get stuck into today's session. Now we're in for a very thorough session today. There's lots of information. I think every webinar I do for you guys, so that it's meaningful to you, there's always going to be lots of information, but I always try my best to make sure that you do not feel overwhelmed when I'm delivering these sessions. I said this right at the beginning, but quite a few people have joined us since. This session is an overview. So it's not going to be a real deep dive into the 11 plus, into the 13 plus, into the 16 plus. It's making you aware of what it is, and I'm summarizing it. There will be follow-up webinars where I talk in a lot more detail about each aspect in like thoroughly. So just bear that in mind for today's session. Today is an overview. It's to give you a summary. It's for you to be well informed so that you can make certain decisions. What are we exploring today? First of all, I'm going to educate you about the different types of school that we have in England. For those of you that were in last month's webinar, you will remember that I said that education is devolved in the United Kingdom. So that means England has its own system, Wales has its own system, Scotland has its own system, Ireland has its own system, and Northern Ireland has its own system. So when it comes to education, there is no one size fits all approach. It very much depends on the location of where you are living. And you'll see today it also depends on the type of school that your child attends. I'll go through the 11 plus, the 13 plus, the 16 plus, and just to get the chat active, can you put in the chat box whether you're actually aware of anything beyond the 11 plus? So if you know about the 13 plus, the 16 plus, just give me some action in the chat box to let me know that you do know. If you don't know, don't worry, that's why we're here. I will then go on to talk about grammar schools versus private schools, what the difference is. I'm going to look at the pros and the cons. That's really important for you to make informed decisions. And then we'll go into the Q&A, which won't be recorded. But for anyone who is watching the YouTube recording of this, if you put a question in the comments section, I will do my best to respond to it, or you can email us. So let's quickly talk about the different school types in England. And if any of you are taking notes, please feel free to, but like I said right at the beginning, I will be sending out via email. If you signed up to this webinar with us via email, I will be sending you the presentation slides at the end of today's webinar so that you have this information to hand. But we have 6 different types of school in the UK. We have faith schools, free schools, academies, city technology colleges, state boarding schools. I bet many of you didn't know that we have state boarding schools, and then private schools, which are also referred to as independent schools. Again, I could do a whole webinar on each. In fact, there could be 6 individual webinars on each type of school. And if there is high demand for that, then of course I will provide, but we're not going to go into that. I'm just summarizing. In summary, what is a faith school? A Catholic school, which Catholic schools are often very popular. A Church of England school. We do have Muslim schools in the UK, not a high number, but we do have Muslim schools. A Jewish school, a Sikh school, a Hindu school, a Buddhist school. The latter schools, there are much fewer of. We have when it comes to faith schools, we have the highest proportion of Church of England schools, no surprises there, and Catholic schools. Now, something that a lot of parents don't know is that faith schools do not have to teach the national curriculum, and they do have their own admissions processes. So for any of you who have currently been going through applying for secondary school for your children, you will have noticed that if you applied to a secondary school that was a faith school, so a Church of England school or a Catholic school, you will have had to complete what we call a supplementary form, where your church minister, your pastor, your vicar, your reverend father would have to certify that you actually attend church, that you are a member of the church, and that the child is present. That's one way of being aware of the fact that you are associating with a faith school. Faith schools do not have to teach the national curriculum because there are aspects of the national curriculum that faith schools may not agree with. So they are allowed to cut certain things out in order to stay in line with the faith. Then we have free schools. So free schools are funded by the government, but they are not run by the local authority. This is a big dream, but I could actually set up a school tomorrow, one day, and it would be declared a free school. A well-known free school that some of you may have come across, it's based in Barnet. It's called the Michaela School. It's known for being notoriously strict, but it also gets some very, very good results. That's a free school. It was started by the head teacher. She just decided to start a school. She was able to apply for the funding. And the rest is history. So they have their own school holidays, for example. They again have their own curriculum, they have their own rules. And if I ever decided to set up the Enrich Learning School, which God's willing one day would be a thing, it would be declared a free school. Then we have academies. There will be some of you that have children that are even in academies in primary school. And also it goes without saying that all of these different types of schools, apart from city technology colleges and apart from state boarding schools, can be primary schools and they can be secondary schools and they can be sixth forms. So an academy receives funding directly from the government and are run by an academy trust. So if your child attends an academy, it's usually part of a chain of different schools. Again, they do follow the national curriculum to a certain extent, but they can do things their own way. So popular academies, the Arc Academy Trust, if your child goes to Arc John Keats or Bolingbroke Academy, that's a school in South London, these are Arc schools. Harris Academy, Harris is a very popular academy chain. That's an example of an academy. Then we have city technology colleges. These are typically secondary schools, typically sixth form schools. They're independent, they are free, often sponsored by companies. Companies often pay for these schools to run, and they focus on teaching science and technology predominantly. Then we have state boarding schools, which I am sure many of you did not even know about. There are state boarding schools that provide free education, but charge fees for the boarding. Most state boarding schools are academies. Last but never least, and the most expensive, private schools, which are also referred to as independent schools. You pay fees, and fees can be as much as, well, there are some fees that are heading towards the £50,000 a year mark. So we have a range of different types of schools, and as a parent in the UK, you have the choice to attend, to send your child, apologies, not for you to attend, you have the choice for your child to attend any of these 6 different schools. Now, just to make it clear, state versus private/independent, faith schools, free schools, academies, city technology colleges, state boarding schools, and something that the government, the UK government, don't declare it a school type, but just to make it clear to all of you, grammar schools, these are all state schools. That when we say state schools, all we mean, because I know that I've got a lot of parents in this community that have immigrated. So when we say state school, all that means is you're not paying school fees. Like you're not paying for your child to go to school. So that's all we're referring to. Private schools or independent schools, you are going to pay a fee. The fee can range from, being completely honest with you, the lowest school fees I'm seeing at the moment per year sit around the 12,000 a year mark, and that's typically for primary and prep school. And it can go, like I said, all the way up to nearly £50,000 a year now. So private school can be quite an expense, but towards the end of today's webinar, I'm actually going to explain to you how you can, I don't want to use the phrase get round the expense of it, but how to make private schooling more accessible to you if that is a choice that you want for your child. So how and when to transition to secondary school. So the first thing is start looking at different types of schools from when your child is in year 3. I know that that seems very early, but if you start looking for your child's secondary school when they are in year 6, it's too late. It's too late because you miss out on the opportunity to attend a private or a grammar school. That's gone. Like you completely miss out on that. You miss out on the opportunity to have a wide range of choice. You will be stressed. So start looking, an emphasis on looking. You don't have to do much, but just be aware, know when the open days are, which brings me on to point number 2. Visit a wide range of open days and take your child with you. My mum took me to my open days when I was in year 4. So she started looking at different secondary school options for me. Well, she was really ahead of the game at the end of year 2 for me, is when she started having secondary school conversations. She had already made up her mind that I wasn't going to a state secondary school. So I went to a private boarding school. And I started going to open days from year 4. I started tutoring to prepare me so I started 11 plus specific tutoring from when I was in year 3. That's why I'm saying to you, you start in year 3. Visiting the open days, what it did for me personally is it gave me drive. It made me ambitious. It made me see what I could have, because my mother very cleverly also sent me to have a look at state secondary schools. Now, listen to me very carefully, because I'm not trying to make private schools seem better than state school. And state schools, don't forget, includes going to look at grammar schools. But right at the beginning of this webinar, I mentioned to you that I'm dyslexic. And at that tender age, I could already recognize that the private schools had the resources to support me and my dyslexia. I couldn't see that support or that level of support in the state schools. I do not want you to leave this webinar feeling as though private school is better than state school, because that's not the point of this. They're very different, but I do want you to be aware that in order for you to take advantage of both, especially if you're going to apply for a grammar school for your child, you need to start the process from year 3. And then the third thing is you have to make a decision. Are you going to apply to grammar school? Are you going to apply to private schools when we're transitioning from primary to secondary? It's mandatory for you to apply to a state school. That's by force. If you don't, then there are repercussions, unless you are choosing for your child to be homeschooled. And even then you would need to declare that to the local authority, and there's a certain process that you have to go through for that. But you have to make a decision as to whether you're applying to grammar or private or both. You can apply to both. There's no cap for applying to both. I will explain a little bit later on about the nuances behind the different applications. And when it comes to your state school choices, well, depending on where you live, your local authority will give you a choice of either picking 4 schools of your choice or 6 schools of your choice. And the 4 schools and the 6 schools, you must complete all the choices, because a lot of parents just put the one school that they want their child to go to, or even worse, they write the same school 6 times or 4 times. Please don't do this. Please complete the form properly. It's designed to work in your favor, not against you. So the thing that everybody has wanted to know about for the longest time, what is the 11 plus? I won't go into all the history of it today. Like I said, it's a summary session, but the 11 plus is a standardized examination administered to some students in England and Northern Ireland. So Northern Ireland also have an 11 plus system, and the exam is typically taken in your child's last year of primary education. So your child will sit their 11 plus exams at the beginning of year 6. So when I say at the beginning, I mean right at the beginning. Most 11 plus exams will take place in September of your child's year 6. That's for the grammar schools. What confuses people about the 11 plus is that it's the same name that is referred to it's the same name that's referred to the private school application process. So I want you to imagine that you have 2 roads. One road says grammar school, one road says private school. On both of those roads, you're doing the 11 plus. I will go into a bit more detail as to what the differences are, but the 11 plus prepares your child for both grammar school and private school. Grammar school is more competitive because there are fewer grammar schools in the country and you don't pay for your child to go to the school. Private school, private schools are more lenient with the grade that your child needs to achieve in order to give them the place, because the bottom line is that you're paying. Obviously, if your child is going for a bursary or a scholarship, it then becomes a bit more competitive to get the place, but nonetheless, it is an easier journey if you're going down the private school 11 plus road. If you're going down the grammar school 11 plus road, it is slightly more challenging just because of the nature of competition. There are 4 subjects that your child needs to study and study very well for the 11 plus: verbal reasoning, non-verbal reasoning, mathematics, and English. Just put in the chat box whether you've come across verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning before. It would be good to know who knows and who doesn't. If your child is in a state primary school, then the likelihood of them being taught verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning is 0. State schools do not teach children verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning. If your child is already in a prep school or a private school, it is highly likely that they would be having some classes in verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning, because if you go to prep school, the expectation is that you'll sit something called a common entrance exam, which I'll talk about in a moment. When it comes to the maths and the English, it's not just your average maths and English for the 11 plus. It is much harder. The expectations are set much higher. If I'm being completely honest, the questions are typically set at the level of a child who is in the middle towards the end of year 7. That's how far ahead your child kind of has to be in order for them to be able to do the 11 plus and pass the exams. This is why at Enrich Learning, all our students, English, maths, verbal, and non-verbal reasoning. That's why our Key Stage 2 11 plus package is designed this way. It's because we're trying to prepare you and your children for the 11 plus process and take away the stress. You should start 11 plus preparation using tutoring from year 3. For a lot of people, obviously, we're in a cost of living crisis. Unfortunately, we've just been told we're in a recession. So you have to look at your finances and prepare yourself accordingly. So if you want to delay the start to year 4, there's nothing wrong with that, but you must start from the very beginning of year 5. Beyond that point, I can't guarantee that your child is going to make it, simply because they haven't had enough time. And like I've said, 11 plus examinations take place at the beginning of year 6. Some schools are now starting to do them though at the end of year 5. So be very, very wary. Make sure you're looking at dates when you're submitting application forms. What is the 13 plus? So I'm just going to have a quick look to see in the chat how many people knew what the 13 plus is. So some parents knew what the 13 plus is. Some don't. Somebody said I need to be aware. I like that. So the 13 plus are exams which children partake in to gain entrance into school at year 9. So the reason why I really wanted to share that in today's webinar is because sometimes parents, we have to be honest, sometimes your child is not going to pass the 11 plus. They may not have been prepared well enough. They may have been really nervous on the day of exams. To be honest, some people in this chat or in today's webinar probably will have missed the 11 plus window because they didn't know when it's going to take place. Don't panic, you have the 13 plus. Now, there are 2 ways in which you gain entry to 13 plus. The first method is by taking the exam in year 6. There are some secondary schools in this country that only take admissions from year 9. So your child will start that secondary school from year 9. And typically, not always for those schools, Your child will sit the exam in year 6. The place will be held for your child on a conditional offer. They'll sit another exam called the Common Entrance in year 8. And then if they pass that Common Entrance exam, they will be given the opportunity to attend that school for year 9. The second method, and the more popular method in terms of the work that I have done over the last 14 years, is when the child sits the exam in year 8. In most schools, you'll be asked to sit a maths, English, and science exam. Some schools will also ask you to sit verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning. You will be asked to partake in an interview, and there will also be a reference from the headmaster of your child's previous school. Now, the interview and the reference from the head teacher, this also happens for some 11 plus schools, so bear this in mind. It's important for you to be aware of this information because your child needs to be well behaved at school. You don't, well, no head teacher wants to take on a child that will bring them problems or behavioral issues. So the behavior of your child really does matter. The attendance of your child really does matter. Coming late to school can impact, it can be the difference between whether your child gets a place at a school or not, especially when it's highly competitive. So just have that information in mind. But the 13 plus is like the 11 plus. There are 2 times in which somebody may sit the exam. They may sit the exam in year 6. It is more likely, though, that they will sit the exam in year 8. Even if they sit the exam in year 6, they're going to sit the common entrance exam in year 8. So if you need to remember, when is my child going to sit the 13 plus exam? Year 8. Subjects that you need to be aware of that they will be asked to do: English, maths, not always, but sometimes science, verbal and non-verbal reasoning as well, interview, and headmaster's reference. So quite a lot for you to take in there for the 13 plus. The 16 plus. Now, many parents don't know about the 16 plus. The 16 plus exams are set by independent schools and selective state schools to allow them to select pupils for intake into year 12, which is the sixth form. This is when the students are either 16 or 17 years old. Now, I create my webinars, presentations, and workshops based on the community that I serve. And I've got a growing community of people who are immigrating from various different parts of the world. The 16 plus is something that you really need to be aware of if you are moving, let's say, from Nigeria to the UK. Your child can actually attend an independent school with a scholarship or a bursary, or a grammar school coming from Nigeria if you do all the paperwork for the 16 plus in time. Okay. If you're coming from overseas, you will also be asked to sit a specific English exam. This is only for overseas students. If you're based in the UK, then you don't need to do it. Your child will also be expected to have strong predicted GCSE grades. Strong predicted GCSE grades, a strong grade is a grade 7 and above. Okay, grade 7 and above. If you're not sure what I'm referring to when I say grade 7 and above, I strongly recommend that you watch the last webinar that I did where I touched on the grading system at GCSE. I will be doing a more specific GCSE focused webinar soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Your child will also be asked to provide a head teacher's reference, and sometimes the child will also have to write a personal statement, very similar to a university application as well. So guess what that means? If your child doesn't make it for 11 plus, they have 13 plus, and they have 16 plus. We have 3 entry points. And I say this so that parents, you don't lose hope. Don't lose hope when it comes to the kind of the private school, grammar school process. I will go into a bit more detail as to when you can sit each exam soon in this webinar today. The last thing I would say is the verbal and the non-verbal reasoning is something that your child will need tutoring for the 16 plus, because there are some schools that use it. There is no standardized process for the 13 plus and the 16 plus. The exams at this stage are usually written by the schools. For 16 plus, it's usually based on a GCSE syllabus. There may be some stretch questions in the exam that are leaning more towards A level. If your child has been studying and they're at the top end of the GCSE grade, they should be able to access those questions with ease. And like I said, your child would have to sit, if you're coming from overseas, they definitely have to sit an English language proficiency exam. So that's the 11 plus, the 13 plus, and 16 plus in summary. So when can you sit each exam? So for grammar schools, you can sit at 11 plus and at 13 plus. Sorry, you can sit for the 11 plus, you can sit the exam for grammar schools and for private and independent schools. So you can sit the exams for both types. At 13 plus, you cannot apply for 13 plus for grammar school. Okay, that's really important for you to know. If you need to take a screenshot of this table, then do so. Again, if you signed up to the webinar, you will be emailed slides, so don't worry so much. But just take down in your notes if you're taking notes. You cannot apply for 13 plus for grammar school, but you can apply for 13 plus for private and independent schools. 16 plus, you can apply to both grammar schools and private schools. Some information that I haven't told you about, because the question is going to be, so when do I apply? Well, if you're applying for the 13 plus, you can actually apply from year 6, but if your child is due to sit the exam in year 8, then make sure you've got that application in by the time your child is in year 7. For the 16 plus, start going to open days from year 10. Have your list of schools from year 10, submit your 16 plus applications at the end of year 10, beginning of year 11, and from December of the year that your child is in year 11, the schools will ask for predicted grades, head teacher references, personal statements, and interviews. So let's talk about the positives of both grammar schools and private/independent schools. Grammar schools, what the positives are is, one, they are free. There is no financial commitment. It's music to everybody's ears. Your child is going to be attending a school that will provide them with the very best possible education with no dent to your wallet, which, makes everybody happy. Secondly, grammar schools are highly academic. Of course, they have to be with such a rigorous application process. By the time they've filtered through everyone, it's going to be the sharpest and the brightest children that get a place at these schools. Third is improved social mobility. And for those of you who don't know what the term social mobility means, it's looking at taking somebody from a lower social class and using education as the tool. It enables them, once they are adults, not always, but once they are adults, it enables them the opportunity to be able to go into a higher social class. So typically, a working class child, so a child that comes from a family that really doesn't have a lot of money, not always, I have to stress it's not always, but sometimes if they go to a grammar school and do very well, it gives them access to university. The access to university then gives them access to a higher paying job. That child then becomes a middle class adult. Do you see how social mobility happens? And grammar school is a great facilitator of that, because obviously there's no financial commitment from the parent to be able to send their child to the school. Positives of private/independent school. The first is access to amazing resources. Private school grounds, or some private schools, have better resources than universities. The private schools that I've worked with, private schools that I go to, and I go to a wide range, these schools are set in some of the most beautiful parts of the country. The space enables the schools to have tennis courts. Some schools have golf courses, um, swimming pools, and whole leisure centers. It gives you access to just incredible resources, amazing science labs, amazing IT equipment. The secondary school I went to has one of the best art schools and best design and technology departments in the country, hands down. My youngest brother is currently studying mechanical engineering with a focus on design. Um, he was a design scholar at secondary school, and he was saying to me recently that he is thinking of going back to the secondary school to use some of the tools there because his university, his Russell Group University, doesn't have the tools that the school had. So private and independent schools, because there's the sheer amount of money they have due to school fees, meaning they have larger budgets, they have access to amazing resources. I've already spoken about the additional support I received. So I had a specialist dyslexia teacher. Um, I had specific coaching and counseling and different therapies to enable me to be able to thrive with my dyslexia. It is not to say that a grammar school or a state school can't provide that, but the level at which it was being provided for me is because the school had the budget to provide it. Not every school will have that kind of budget. And then lastly, I've touched on this for the private and grammar schools, is the increased opportunity via extracurricular activities. So there are certain activities that are synonymous with private schooling: debating, Model United Nations, certain athletics activities like pole vault and um, high jump and discus. And there are some really high level sport. I would say high level sport and music is often made available for people in private schools, again because of the money. It's not to say that it's not available at grammar schools and at state schools, but the sheer level of resource just isn't there because the government has cut funding for education so many times that schools are scrimping and saving to be able to provide these things for children. Then we have grammar versus independent schools, the negatives, because it's really important for me to give you a balanced perspective. So with grammar schools, it's free as long as you live in the catchment area. And now living in the catchment area for these schools is very expensive. So whilst you will not be paying school fees, you will be paying for your child to go to a grammar school either in high rents or high mortgages or high purchase prices for homes. It's really as simple as that. I live within the catchment area of a very popular grammar school in North London, and the properties in and around me are worth so much more than what they actually are simply because of the proximity to this particular school. So that's something you have to bear in mind as a parent. You know, if you're going to move to the catchment area of um, a grammar school, do you have the financial means to be able to cope with what that is? Because the cost is going to come there. It may not be as high as paying private school fees, but regardless, you're going to pay for it that way. The second thing is lots of competition. It's grueling. You know, thousands and thousands of people apply, tens of thousands of people apply for grammar schools, and the grammar schools typically have, 150, push 180 places. So statistically, it's tough for your child to pass the exam, and that's something for you to bear in mind. The third thing, and something that I put down as a positive, but it's also a negative, is just how strictly academic grammar schools tend to be. Grammar schools want academic results. They want to be able to say that all their students got A's and A stars, or when we're talking about GCSEs, got 7, 8, 9 across the board. And so if your child is creative, or if your child is sporty, or if your child is more musical, then a grammar school may not actually be the best setting for them. Even though I am personally a very academic person, a grammar school would not have been a good setting for me because when I was a school child, I was struggling with academia because my dyslexia was mismanaged. It wasn't until I had all that support that I was able to tap into my academic success. So it's something to bear in mind. Look at your child realistically and pleading because I work with so many parents that are pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And if I'm being sincere, grammar school is not for their child, but they're pushing and pushing and pushing, and they're not looking at the child's excellence in their talent. They're forcing something else. That's something you really, really need to think about as a parent. The cons of private and independent schools. Well, the first con is school fees. Like I've said, some schools are costing as much as £50,000 a year. That's a lot of money. And so you need to have strong financial plans, even with scholarships and bursaries, to be able to afford these schools. You may have to take up a second job. You may have to sell an asset. You may have to let go of things. You'll have to change your lifestyle. The majority of people that send their kids to private school in England, they're not as rich as people think. They've just made certain sacrifices. The bottom line is that a lot of them won't be driving a BMW or a Mercedes. They will be driving something more affordable in order to pay school fees. Many of these families don't go abroad for summer holidays because every penny goes towards school fees. They may not be eating luxurious meals or they may not be going out for takeaway. Everything goes towards school fees. So if you are willing to make the lifestyle change, if you're willing to make sacrifice is the key word when it comes to private and independent schools. Even if you have money, even if you're going for the scholarship and the bursary, it's really important that you're take into consideration the lifestyle change that comes with sending your child to a private or an independent school. Second thing to bear in mind, and this is very important because the Enrich Learning parent community is for ethnic minority parents only. I am setting out to build the largest parent community for ethnic minority parents, Black, Asian, whatever you are, as long as you're an ethnic minority. I'm doing this for you because I have felt that there isn't a safe space for parents like yourselves. When you're sending your child to private and independent school, I will not lie to you. Have in the back of your mind that there will be a lack of equity, diversity, and inclusion. It is highly likely that your child will experience racism. And that is something that you have to be mentally prepared for. It's also something that you have to have a conversation with your child about. And you also have to be honest about whether your child is mature enough to deal with things such as racism. Is your child mature enough to not have their confidence knocked by the fact that they're the only Black person in the boarding house or the only Black person in the year group? You need to be very honest about these things with yourselves because a lot of parents send their children to private and independent schools, which are still majority white places. Okay. And then they're shocked and it's like, I wasn't expecting that. Well, I'm telling you now, so expect it. Things are changing. A lot of private schools are, not all of them, but a lot of them are making efforts to be inclusive. But you just have to have in the back of your mind that your child will be one of the few people of color in those spaces. And then the last thing is finding the right school. It's very time consuming. Open days. A lot of private schools are what we call in the sticks. So they're in the countryside. It's going to require you to drive. Something else I didn't mention, but you typically have to pay for the application form to private schools. And the lowest fee these days sits around the £100 mark. So if you apply to 5 private schools and each application is £100, that's £500 you spent on application fees, and there's no guarantee that your child is even going to get a place at that school, right? So it's time consuming both monetarily but also in the real literal concept of time, and that's something that you have to bear in mind. I remember my parents spent several weekends, and back then there was no TomTom or like Google Maps or City Mapper. We had the A to Z London map in the car. Getting from one school to another, that's just something that you have to bear in mind when it comes to this journey. So that's everything for today's webinar on private and grammar schools. There's been so much demand. I've actually extended the discounted tutoring offer. So if you want to prepare your child for grammar or grammar or private schools, or both, then feel free to get in touch with us. We are doing 3 months of 10% off for your child, access to our Enrich Learning referral program, free access to the Enrich Learning WhatsApp community, and free access to all our parent webinars, which brings me nicely onto the next point, which is that I have these are our contact details. And again, I'll send this all out to you via email. But the next surprise I have is next week, there's going to be another surprise webinar. However, this webinar is going to be for Enrich Learning community members only. How do you become a community member? All you have to do is join the WhatsApp group. It's free. We are never going to charge you. The webinar is also free. The only thing is the gateway into that webinar is to be a member of the community. Being a member of the community means you either have our tutoring services or you're in the WhatsApp group. It's going to be a popular one. The next webinar is on guidance on private/independent school applications. I'm also going to be giving my personal opinions on which private and grammar schools are, which private/independent schools are actually worth your time. And I'm going to be going into a lot of detail about scholarships and bursaries, how to get them, what the difference between the two of them are, and things of that nature. So if that is of interest to you, if you're watching the YouTube video of this, the link to join the WhatsApp community will be in the description box below. And if you are watching this now, I will put the link to join the WhatsApp community group in the chat box. Share it with your friends if they're interested in scholarships and bursaries. Just want you guys to become part of the community so that you can take advantage of webinars of this nature. If you're part of the community, then I'll see you next week. I will stop recording now and we'll head into our questions and answer session. Thank you. And I will unmute you for that too.